Hello students, this is Sumit Bose and I am from the Bodhi Academy. In the last part, we discussed on the matter rise of the Napoleon. Now today we are going to discuss on the matter fall of Napoleon. Okay. Now Napoleon was one of the greatest rulers in the history. Okay, and his the popularity he had was too much. But slowly, Napoleon started to become a dictator, and slowly, he started to lose all the popularity. Okay, he considered himself that he is the sword of revolution, but he didn't give the freedom to the areas or to the areas which he won in war. Okay, he just put his relatives or his brothers on their kingdom and to rule them. So this is not liberty. He used to consider himself as the sword of revolution. Okay, but he didn't give any liberty or freedom to the people. Okay, he just changed the kingship. Okay, so let's see what were the factors which were responsible for the fall of Napoleon. So there are three main factors. First is the Peninsular War. The second factor is the Russian campaign. The third factor is the direct role of Britain. So these are three main factors. Okay. So first we will look at the first factor, but that is the Peninsular War. Okay, let's go. Peninsular War. Napoleon's war in Spanish and Portuguese Peninsular marked the beginning of the end. Okay, basically Napoleon's war against the Spanish and the Portuguese. It's a huge. It was the first time when Napoleon's army were defeated. Okay, and it cost and the resources were used at a huge cost. Okay, so it drained also Napoleon's resources. Okay, Napoleon also stated in his biography that it was the Napoleon also stated in his biography that it was the Spanish ulcer that ruined me. It was the Spanish ulcer that ruined me. Okay, so his defeats in Spain and Portugal proved that the rest of the Europe, that Napoleon's army are no longer invincible. Okay, this was not just a defeat. This was not just a defeat. It also proved that Napoleon and his army are not no longer invincible to the entire Europe. So which ultimately gave hope to the hearts of his enemies that yeah, we can, if they can also defeat him, Napoleon, we also can. Okay, let's move on the second point, that is the Russian campaign. Now the Russian campaign is one of the it is look at it is one of the biggest factor that affected Napoleon's downfall. Okay, Napoleon lost many things in this war. Okay, Napoleon started his campaign against Russia. Okay, but when he but strange the Russian followed a strange strategy. Okay, whenever Napoleon and his army was making progress, there were no Russians. The Russians were not fighting back, but they were doing something. Three things: what? Burning houses, poisoning water, burning grains. Why? Now the question is, why were they burning houses? So that Napoleon and his army cannot use them. Why were they poisoning water? Same thing, so that Napoleon and his army cannot use the water. Burning food grain, again for the same thing, that Napoleon and his army cannot use the food grains. Okay, so as Napoleon was approaching towards Russia, the Russian were holding back. They were vacating the land and they were holding back. Okay, so when Napoleon reached the center, suppose this is the center and this is Moscow. When Napoleon and his army reached Moscow, Napoleon thought that the Russian Tsar, the Russian king, will surrender himself, okay, in front of Napoleon, but that didn't happen. And moreover, another thing happened: sudden cold, okay, the freezing cold of Russia, the freezing climate of Russia, it damaged the troops of Napoleon. It hampered his Napoleon and his troops and the resources of Napoleon. Okay, so let's check on the main point and let's see what are the other details we can find. See, the Russian campaign. It is considered as the biggest factors responsible for the fall of Napoleon. It drained the manpower and the resources of Napoleon. The factor responsible for the failure were, why were they failure? Inefficient access to resources. As I told you, they did three things: they poisoned the water, they burned the houses, they burned down the food grains. So inefficient access to resources, there were no resources available for the troops of Napoleon. Second one is freezing cold. Okay, the cold was too much. Many soldiers of Napoleon died in that extreme cold of Russia. And the third factor, when now Napoleon was waiting for surrender, for the Russians to surrender, okay, they didn't surrender, and freezing cold attack, and all of a sudden the guerrilla warfare started. Sudden attack of the Russian troops, okay, the Red Cross army. The third one is strategic efforts of the French military leaders. Now the French military leaders that time were not sufficient enough, they were not trained enough, so their strategy was too bad. Their strategy was kind of was not up to that marks, which ultimately led to the downfall of this huge campaign. Now when Napoleon returned back to France, it drained his resources, his manpower or his military power was down to half. And as it drained the resources, the economical and financial condition of France, okay, was horrible. So we can let's move on to the next point, that is direct role of Britain. Now Britain, Napoleon in his entire life, he always wanted to defeat Britain, but he always said, he was unable to do that because the Britishers had the biggest advantage, and Napoleon also used to consider England as the queen of the sea. Okay, it is impossible to defeat England in sea. Okay, so it was not possible, but Napoleon tried many times to defeat the British. Okay, so the Britishers fought back. How? Britain had its command of the sea, just like I told you, and used its advantage. So the Britishers used their sea route as the advantage, okay, to suppress Napoleon or to boost the downfall of Napoleon. Britain provided aid to the enemies of Napoleon. Okay, hence Britain's role was significant in the downfall of Napoleon. Britain provided aid. For example, Britain provided aid to Austria also, which was the biggest enemy, one of the biggest enemies of Napoleon. Okay, so it ultimately resulted this great dictator or ruler, whatever we may call him, to its to reach on its knees and go to the ultimate downfall. I hope you all understood, and for more information and details, please contact the Bodhi Academy.